Jace and Leo were deep in a game of poker when the sound of a key in the lock sent them scrambling. Cards flew under sofa cushions. A ridiculous paper strip was ripped from Leo's face, and Jace frantically wiped the crude drawing of a turtle from his own forehead. They barely managed to reassume their executive personas by the time the door opened. Jace told Leo that the proposed investment in boutique alpaca farming carried too much risk for him to sanction. He suggested they could discuss the venture at a later date. Asher walked into the living room, his expression a mask of sorrow. He asked why his dozens of calls the previous day had gone unanswered. Leo, already settled into a convincing display of impatience, said only that he was busy. He gestured dismissively toward Jace, telling Asher not to cause trouble while they were in the middle of a business meeting, and ordered him to go prepare dinner. Asher's gaze on Leo was so full of hurt that he looked moments away from tears. Leo's brow furrowed, and he demanded to know who Asher thought he was impressing with that funereal expression before telling him again to leave. Asher's lips tightened, and he turned. His shoulders slumped as he walked silently toward the kitchen. Jace shot Leo a subtle, approving glance. Leo's return look was smug. He was a natural performer. 30 minutes later, the two of them stared at the artfully arranged, fragrant dishes on the table in stunned silence. Leo announced he would be away on business for the next few days. As he spoke, he tugged at his collar, a deliberate gesture to expose the dark mark on his neck. It was, more accurately, a welt created by the mouth of a plastic water bottle, courtesy of Jace. The effect was instantaneous. Asher's eyes reddened the moment he saw it. He asked if it was truly a business trip or if Leo had found someone else, questioning what Leo took him for. Leo slammed his chopsticks down with a sharp crack, accusing Asher of being needlessly dramatic. He stated that if this was how things were going to be, they should just get a divorce because he was done. At the word divorce, Asher closed his eyes, a flicker of profound pain crossing his face. Yet he bent down, retrieved the fallen utensils, and spoke in a choked voice, asking Leo to drop the subject and just eat. As if nothing had happened, he ladled soup into Leo's bowl with a gentle hand. He mentioned that he knew Leo loved fish and that this was a new seafood bisque recipe he had been practicing. Leo drank a spoonful with performative disdain, and a second later, his eyes rolled back in his head as he slumped over, unconscious. Jace and Asher were both shocked, immediately hoisting his limp body and rushing him to the hospital. When Leo awoke in the sterile white room, his first instinct was to wail for his mother. Jace, ever vigilant, clapped a hand over his mouth and hissed a reminder about staying in character. Asher burst through the door, shoving Jace aside with a force that sent him spinning into the wall, nearly knocking the wind out of him. For a supposedly gentle man, Asher was surprisingly strong and unervingly tall, a physical presence that neither Jace nor Leo could truly match. Asher hovered over the bed, his voice tight with anxiety as he asked how Leo was feeling. Leo, trembling beneath his gaze, managed to croak out an order for him to get out, insisting he didn't want to see him. A wounded look flashed across Asher's face. He replied softly that he would wait outside until Leo was ready to see him, and that he would go home to prepare some nourishing food in case Leo got hungry. After Asher left, Leo shot up in bed like a spring. He told Jace, with an air of urgency, that their time was running out. Jace, still recovering, asked what he meant. Leo ignored the sarcasm and explained his theory that Asher must have already met the story's true hero and was now trying to poison him, the villainous boyfriend, to get him out of the picture. Jace considered this, remarking that his own situation with his supposed dependent was likely reaching a similar climax. The two friends shared a look of grim understanding. They had to break things off and execute their exit strategy soon. They were trapped in the bare-bones plot of a novel. Leo was the callous, cheating partner to a sweet, domestic type. Jace was the perverse, wealthy benefactor to a cold, impoverished student. Their guiding AI had gone offline, and they had no special advantages. Just two 18-year-old kids pretending to be titans of industry, utterly out of their depth. Though the original text only referred to the couples as Partner 1 and Love Interest 1, finding their counterparts had been disturbingly easy. Asher was striking, with long, beautiful silver blonde hair. Despite his cool demeanor and imposing height, Leo had been certain that only the story's designated domestic partner would have such a feature. Jace's target had been even more obvious. He had found Cade beaten and bloody in a back alley, a perfect match for the description of a student constantly hounded by debt collectors. Cade was aggressively handsome, with an unapproachable aura that Jace had spent months trying to penetrate. When Jace had offered to become his patron, Cade had studied him for a long, silent moment before turning his head with a faint, derisive smile and agreeing. Now, half a year later, the story's intended heroes were about to make their entrance. In the original plot, the two villains were systematically destroyed by them, one driven to suicide, the other killed in a fire. Consequently, Jace and Leo had long ago planned to fake their own deaths and disappear. Jace declared that they would have to leave their assets behind. Any attempt to liquidate them would attract unwanted attention. He reasoned that leaving the money to their counterparts might mitigate some of the hatred directed toward them. Leo agreed, joking grimly that all they needed for their life on the run was a pack of cigarettes and a guitar. Jace scoffed, telling him to drop the act. Leo's persona cracked, and he admitted that some cash for the gaming arcades would be nice. Back at his penthouse, Jace began the process of sorting his most prized possessions. The fortune was forfeit, but the collection of comic books and limited ion action figures he had amassed in this world was coming with him. A man can live without wealth, but not without his passions. He was in the middle of excitedly packing when he heard a noise from downstairs. Peeking over the railing, his eyes met Cade's. He asked what Cade was doing there, surreptitiously locking the door to his collection room behind him. Cade tossed his backpack onto the sofa and started up the stairs, retorting with a question of his own. Jace coldly reminded him that he was not to come uninvited. Cade stopped directly in front of him, a towering figure that blocked the light. His sharp gaze swept the area before settling on the locked door behind Jace. He asked if Jace was hiding someone. Jace replied that it was none of a dependent's business. Cade's expression darkened instantly. Jace commanded him to go to the bedroom and get ready, stating that Cade had broken the rules of their arrangement and would be punished. Cade stared at him for a long moment, then turned and complied without a word. The poor kid was probably too exhausted to resist. The riding crop was a prop Jace had ordered online, chosen for its soft material that made a loud snap but caused little actual pain. He put on a show, lashing out theatrically while demanding to know if Cade understood his mistake. The sheer embarrassment of the act made his toes curl every single time. Cade, breathing heavily, stared back at him with eyes like a hungry wolf, full of raw want. Jace's gaze drifted downward and he felt a jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. He muttered an insult about Cade's eagerness, feeling his own cheeks flush. He quickly turned away, pretending to inspect the crop, but a mocking laugh came from behind him. Cade asked if the master was finished. Jace retorted that they were just getting started. He retrieved a bottle of expensive wine from the cabinet, poured a full glass, and declared it a special reward. He forced the liquid into Cade's mouth, who initially looked scornful but then slumped over, unconscious. This was their ritual. Whenever things were about to escalate, Jace would drug Cade. The titillation of the power play was one thing, but actual intimacy was out of the question. A man had to protect three things in life: his family, his friends, and his own backside. With his collectibles packed, he called Leo. Leo answered immediately, begging to be the first one to initiate the breakup. He claimed that Asher's cooking was becoming a daily ordeal, and that if he didn't get out soon, he wouldn't live to see another day. For his staged affair, Leo chose the owner of a charming little cafe they frequented, a gentleman of 28 named Remy. Dressed in his apron, Remy exuded a comforting, almost maternal warmth that always made Leo wistful for his mother's cooking. According to the plot, the public exposure of the affair would be the final blow to the domestic partner's spirit, leading to their bitter separation. So, Leo marched into the cafe, a bouquet of roses in hand, and loudly declared his feelings for Remy. He proclaimed that from the first time he tasted Remy's tomato soup, he knew he was the most perfect person he had ever met. Dropping to one knee, he presented the flowers, asking for a chance to win his heart. Jace stood to the side, snapping pictures like a tabloid photographer, effectively documenting the betrayal. Other patrons, drawn by the commotion, started to gather. Jace initiated a chant of "Say Yes," which the crowd eagerly joined. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Jace saw him. Asher stood in the doorway, his face devoid of expression, yet radiating an aura of pure menace. He was supposed to find out about this from the photos Jace would leak, not walk in on it. Asher smiled, a chillingly pleasant expression, as he kicked aside a table that was in his way. The chair splintered with a loud crack. He told Leo that while he was here making a scene, he had been at home making him soup. He seized Leo by the collar with one hand and dragged him away. Leo squawked, protesting that Asher wasn't gentle at all and that he wanted a divorce. Asher silenced him with a sharp chop to the side of his neck, and Leo went limp in his arms. Jace, feeling like a complete coward, didn't dare say a word as he watched his friend get manhandled. Remy stepped forward, demanding to know if they were a couple, adding that even so, violence was not the answer. Asher shot him a frigid look, stating that he would pay for the damages but that his family affairs were none of Remy's business, and warned him to stay away from Leo in the future. Jace never found out what happened when they got home, only that Asher, for the first time, had lost control and nearly strangled Leo. The next day, Asher signed the divorce papers, slamming the door so hard the building shook. From that day on, Leo's company was besieged. Accusations of tax evasion, regulatory violations, and unsafe products came one after another. Hounded by media and authorities, Leo was ruined. The true hero had made his move. The corporate assault was swift and brutal. Leo's company, built on the flimsy knowledge of two college freshmen, crumbled. Not only did it go bankrupt, but it left him with a $30 million debt. He sold everything he had. He told Jace that Asher must despise him now. He had just finished a bottle of whiskey, and his voice was thick with emotion. He admitted that, aside from his terrible cooking, Asher had actually been very good to him. Jace clapped a hand on his shoulder, trying to console him by reminding him that once the story was finished, they could go home. That's what the AI had promised before it vanished. Leo nodded, sniffing and forcing a smile. He declared that he would go die first, and that the rest was up to Jace. As they were leaving the bar, they stumbled upon a scene. A waiter being accosted by an aggressive patron. The man was shouting that his jacket cost $40,000 and that if the kid couldn't pay for it, he would have to work it off in other ways. The young man struggled on the floor, pleading not to be touched. Jace saw his cold, defiant face and stopped. He announced that he would cover the cost. The man sneered, unwilling to let his prey go. Jace and Leo stepped forward, their combined height casting a long shadow over him. They asked if he was going to let the kid go, or if they were going to have a problem. Afterward, the young man scrambled to his feet, thanking them for their help. He pulled out a pen and wrote down his contact information, handing it to Jace without a trace of servility. He promised to pay the money back and gave his name and phone number, adding that if Jace didn't trust him, he could find him at Kingston University's economics department. Leo peered over Jace's shoulder to read the name, Evan. Jace pocketed the paper, satisfied. With Leo's part of the plot complete, it was his turn. This Evan would be the perfect new dependent. At dawn, under Jace's strict instructions, Leo departed with a large backpack, a resentful look on his face. The resentment was mainly because the bag was filled with Jace's comics and figurines. Leo was headed to a secluded safe house to wait for Jace to stage his own death, after which they would flee together. A week after Leo's departure, Asher knocked on Jace's door. He asked if Jace had any way of contacting Leo, explaining that he had heard about the company's collapse and wanted to help financially, for old time's sake. His expression was sincere, tinged with worry. Jace saw no hint of deception. Considering they were still within the 30-day cooling-off period for their divorce, perhaps Asher was just feeling sentimental. Jace thanked him but said it wasn't necessary. As he tried to close the door, Asher blocked it with his hand. He asked if Leo didn't need help even with $30 million in debt. For a split second, Jace thought he saw a flicker of triumph in Asher's eyes. He met his gaze calmly and told him that Leo was dead. Asher froze for a moment, then gave a hollow laugh, accusing Jace of joking. Jace rubbed his temples, feigning exhaustion. He assured Asher he wouldn't joke about such a thing. The bankruptcy had been too much for Leo. He had taken his own life the previous week. Jace had handled the arrangements himself. His ashes were at Greenwood Memorial. If Asher didn't believe him, he could take him there. At the cemetery, the sight of Leo's black and white photo on the headstone seemed to shatter Asher completely. He staggered back, muttering in disbelief that it couldn't be possible. He had only wanted Leo to come back to him. He hadn't meant to push him so far. He insisted he hadn't played his final card. So how could this have happened? Suddenly, he became frantic, trying to claw at the sealed grave. Jace grabbed him, telling him to let Leo rest in peace. Inside the urn was nothing but the dust from a few Cheetos Leo had eaten before tossing the bag inside. He never imagined someone would be crazed enough to try and look. Jace added that Leo had been drinking heavily before the end, that he had truly lost the will to live and that death was a release for him. He urged Asher to accept it. Took a long time for Asher to calm down. He lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot, and asked about Leo's belongings. Jace said they were all gone, sold to pay off debts. Asher fell silent again. Jace glanced at the empty plot next to Leo's. That one was reserved for him. Inside, he had placed a rare Spider-Man Funko Pop. He made a mental note to have the plot properly sealed. He told Asher he had to leave and walked away down the path. A long moment later, a raw, desperate cry echoed from the top of the hill. Jace wired Cade a final payment with a message. The arrangement is over. Don't contact me again. Almost immediately, his phone rang with Cade's number. His heart hammered in his chest as he blocked it. A few minutes later, his doorbell rang. He opened it, feigning annoyance at the timing. Evan stood on the doorstep, slightly out of breath. He apologized, saying his classes had run late. Jace told him to hurry up and get started. Evan had been tutoring him for a week, and the routine was familiar. He followed Jace into the study. Finding the room a bit warm, he took off his jacket. Jace urged him to get on with it, claiming he couldn't wait. Evan, looking a little surprised, agreed and pulled a stack of textbooks from his bag. He informed Jace that his last problem set was well done, but his calculus was still weak, so they would focus on that today. Jace took the papers and began to work. A brilliant university student in the same field of study was too good an opportunity to pass up. He could secretly get ahead now and return to his old life as a star student. His dear friend Leo would be one step behind him. Half an hour into his work, a furious, incessant pounding started at the front door. Cade was outside, roaring Jace's name and demanding an explanation. Evan, confused, went to open the door. The heat in the apartment had brought a slight flush to his face, and he'd unbuttoned the top of his shirt. Cade looked at him, his eyes murderous. Jace sauntered out from the study. He told Cade he thought he'd made himself clear. Cade sneered, asking if Jace thought he could end things just like that. Jace replied that he had grown tired of him. Cade pointed a shaking finger at Evan, asking if it was because of him. Jace confirmed it. The silence was thick with tension. Evan hesitantly asked if they were still going to do the problem set. Cade let out a buncoy roar of disbelief, shouting that they were even engaging in some kind of teacher-student roleplay. Jace pulled out his phone and transferred more money. He asked if another $500,000 was enough to make Cade go away. Cade's chest heaved. After a long moment, he stepped forward, his eyes red as he grabbed Jace's shoulders. He asked if it had ever been more than just an arrangement, if there had been any affection at all. Jace said there hadn't. Cade then asked what he would say if he told him he loved him. Jace was stunned into silence. Finally, Cade's hope died. He shook his head with a self-deprecating laugh and asked for one last time, promising he wouldn't bother him again. Jace agreed. But when he tried to drug Cade with the wine as he always did, Cade resisted, forcing the glass to Jace's own lips. Before Jace could even process what was happening, his world went black. He awoke shackled to a bed in an unfamiliar room. Cade was by the window, smoking, a lonely figure surrounded by a pile of cigarette butts. His body felt weak and unresponsive. After finishing his cigarette, Cade walked over and looked down at him. He stated that Jace was truly something else, then lightly patted his cheek, remarking that he was the first person who had ever dared to play him like that. Jace tried to reason with him, but Cade's voice was grim as he promised he would never let him go. Then he turned and left. Jace suspected Cade was going to fetch the true hero to come and beat him. He was panicked. This imprisonment wasn't part of the original story. He lay there for 20 minutes, his mind racing, when he smelled something burning. He looked down and saw that one of Cade's carelessly discarded cigarettes had set the carpet on fire. He started banging on the door, but it wouldn't budge. He yelled for help, screaming Cade's name. The flames grew, and the room filled with thick, choking smoke. His head swam and he coughed violently. Then he heard a voice from outside. It was Leo. He told Jace to come down. Wrapping himself in the duvet, Jace forced open the window, searing his palms on the hot glass. He saw Leo below on a motorcycle, grinning up at him, his canines flashing. Jace grinned back. His best friend was always reliable. He leaped. The motorcycle roared to life, the wind whipping past them as they sped away. As he fled, Jace looked back at the villa, now engulfed in flames, and the image of Cade telling him he loved him inexplicably flashed in his mind. Goodbye, Cade. After 3 days on the road, they settled in a coastal town. Leo declared an all-nighter. Jace agreed. It was time to game until they dropped. To maintain their executive personas, They hadn't touched a video game since arriving in this world. Now they shed their suits and ties for hoodies, reverting to their true selves. Leo said they would stay here until the main couples got together and completely forgot about them. Then, with the villains' roles fulfilled, they could go home. For 2 months, they lived a life of blissful degeneracy. They slept until noon and then spent the rest of their days at a 24-hour LAN gaming center, ordering takeout when they got hungry. It wasn't as fulfilling as they'd imagined. As 2 people who were officially dead, they kept a low profile. At night, Leo would sometimes call out a name in his sleep. Jace often found his own mind drifting back to Cade. The life was dull, but having a friend made it bearable. Until one afternoon, Leo, engrossed in his game, yelled for the owner to bring him a cup of noodles and a soda. A muffled voice replied that it would be right there. About 10 minutes later, the food was placed beside him. He said thanks without looking up. A familiar voice replied that he was welcome. Jace and Leo both froze and looked up. Asher stood there, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He remarked that for someone who claimed to like the domestic type, Leo had certainly run far. His expression promised murder. Jace bolted. Leo, a second too slow, was caught. Jace burst out of the gaming center's doors and ran straight into a wall of men in black suits. He heard Asher's unhurried voice from behind him, informing someone on the phone that he had sent the location and that they should hurry before he got away. Soon, the deafening sound of rotors filled the air. Jace looked up. A helicopter was descending, and in the open doorway was Cade. The worlds in these novels were always so over the top. Their protagonists were nothing like the characters they were supposed to be. In the end, they were both captured. Asher removed a pair of black leather gloves and extended a hand to Cade with an air of aristocratic grace, congratulating him on successfully navigating his family's brutal succession war. Cade returned the handshake coolly, replying that it was nothing compared to Asher's willingness to walk a darker path, casually mentioning a $50 billion arms deal. Asher dismissed it as merely walking on the razor's edge. The 2 of them, tall and imposing in a suit and an overcoat, looked like kings of the underworld. Beside them, Jace and Leo, in their juvenile graphic hoodies, felt a profound, second-hand embarrassment for themselves. Cade told Asher that he owed him for this, and that he would help him clean up his business, but that the price would be steep. Asher replied that no matter how much money he made, his line of work would never be respectable, and besides, Leo would be afraid. He glanced at Leo, a flicker of something soft in his eyes, saying he didn't want to see him scared enough to run away again. At that, Cade's gaze shifted to Jace, hot and intense. Jace suddenly felt deeply uncomfortable and wanted to touch his nose, but his hands were tied. Just then, a cheerful chime echoed in his mind. The system announced its return, asking to see how its beloved hosts had progressed the plot. After a long, silent pause, an ear-splitting shriek of rage erupted in their heads. The system screamed that they had seduced the main protagonists. It wailed about what would happen to the intended love interests now that the story was completely derailed. Leo asked what it meant. Asher was the main protagonist? And with that, Leo fainted. Asher's composure shattered, and he rushed to catch him. He told Cade they would talk later. Cade nodded, then escorted Jace onto the helicopter. The system was still ranting. Jace, having had enough, retorted that it had never specified who was who, so how could it be their fault? The system continued its tirade, and Jace's anger flared. He fired back, calling it a useless AI that had been absent from the start and had the gall to blame them now. He argued with it furiously in his mind for a full hour before finally grabbing the front of Cade's shirt, pulling him in and kissing him hard. He thought defiantly that if he was going to romance the protagonist, he would do it right. The main hero's lips were surprisingly soft. He decided he would keep him and turn him so thoroughly that he could never be a top again. The system made a fizzing, static sound and then went silent, short-circuited. Jace gave a satisfied smirk, only then noticing the dark, hungry look in Cade's eyes, his own tie now hanging loose from where Jace had yanked it. Cade didn't do anything on the helicopter, but the moment they were home, he kissed Jace until his lips were swollen. His voice was laced with a delayed agony as he confessed he hadn't gone a single day in the past 2 months without thinking of him. He had believed Jace had really died in that fire, burned to nothing, and it had nearly driven him mad. Then he had learned the truth about his arrangement with Evan, and his days had become filled with regret. He had even transferred his entire inheritance to him. Cade cradled Jace's face, his eyes red-rimmed. He asked how Jace could have been so cruel, despite the fact that he had concealed his own identity. That familiar, uncomfortable feeling returned, like 1,000 ants crawling over his skin. Jace turned his back to him, stating flatly that he was a top, and that the two of them could never work. Cade was silent for a moment. Jace pressed his advantage, saying that being on the bottom was out of the question, and if Cade couldn't accept that, he should let him go. Cade's response was immediate and absolute. Letting him go was not an option. Before Jace could argue, Cade's mouth was on his again, and he was being dragged into the bedroom. The next day, Jace had barely opened his eyes when Cade, roused by the movement, pressed against him again. Jace held up a hand to stop him, complaining that his back was about to break. Cade chuckled, his face buried in Jace's neck. He murmured that with the way Jace used to drug him at the critical moment, he had started to think he had a problem. He stroked Jace's hair, remarking that for someone who had only gotten to sleep at 3 in the morning, he seemed to have a lot of energy. Jace replied weakly that a student's stamina was like a diamond. Cade raised an eyebrow, squeezing his cheek. He admitted that Jace's face did look like a college student's, and that was what had attracted him in the first place. After their morning, Cade left to attend to his business. Jace lay in bed, worried about Leo and whether he was being abused by his volatile partner. He mentally called for the system to show him a live feed of Leo. The system responded with a sneer, asking who he thought he was to be giving it orders. Jace called it useless. Provoked, the system boasted that such a simple task was nothing for it and that it would show him what 4K high definition really looked like. An image instantly appeared in his mind. Leo, his hair a mess, was wandering around the house calling for Asher. Asher emerged from the kitchen, looking exasperated, and asked what was wrong now. Leo threw his arms around him, whining that he'd had a nightmare. Asher placated him by feeding him a piece of slightly burnt pastry. Leo winced as he ate it, then nuzzled against Asher's neck, murmuring that life on the run was hard and he would never leave again. He then added that he needed to file down his canines. Asher, confused, asked why, saying his teeth were beautiful. Leo explained that it was because it must hurt when Asher froze, then turned his head, trying to suppress a laugh. He finally let out a soft chuckle and ruffled Leo's hair, his gaze full of affection as he told him not to worry, that he loved his little tiger's teeth. Jace felt violated. He demanded the system turn it off immediately. He had no desire to watch his friend act like a submissive pet. The system cackled, enjoying his discomfort, and refused, declaring it would force him to watch until his eyes burned out. Jace and Leo didn't see each other again for a month. Jace walked into a coffee shop, hands in his pockets, and showed off his new, limited ion sneakers. Leo responded with an unimpressed look and theatrically displayed the $50,000 mechanical watch on his wrist. Not to be outdone, Jace dangled the keys to his new Maserati. Leo countered by pulling out a black CR card with no spending limit. Jace was floored. His friend truly had no desire to work for a living. He lamented that he feared his brother suffering, but he also feared his brother driving a Land Rover. The system's voice screeched in their heads, berating them for stealing the protagonists and living as kept men, and for having the audacity to feel superior about it. Leo nonchalantly cleaned his ear, suggesting the system could just find 2 new partners for the original love interests. The system cursed, explaining that the original love interests weren't the type to be kept. They were thriving on their own. It then showed them a real-time update. Remy's Cafe had expanded into a national chain and was now publicly traded. Evan had started his own company in his junior year, securing major investments with his sheer brilliance and paying off all his debts. Leo shrugged, saying that was even better. Jace agreed, asking why the system cared if they were living the easy life. What was wrong with being supported when it meant having everything they could want? The system was apoplectic. It warned them that the villain's death ending was unchangeable and that their laughter wouldn't last forever. They ignored the threat, choosing instead to enjoy the most carefree period they had known since arriving in this world. Winter arrived. The boundless energy of youth made it impossible for them to stay indoors, so they took up mountain climbing and outdoor exploration. One day, on a black, rocky plateau, Leo, dressed in hiking gear, dropped to his knees and shouted that he had found a piece of amber. Jace made his way over with his hiking poles. Leo stared at the golden stone in his palm, his expression full of longing. He said that his and Asher's 1-year anniversary was approaching, and he wanted to make a ring for him with it. He confessed that their relationship had started so abruptly, with no ceremony or blessings, yet Asher had still married him. He wanted to show him how much he loved him. He carefully pocketed the amber and asked if Jace wanted to look for a stone for Cade. Jace shook his head, saying he didn't need to. He had already found a rare blue gemstone. A ring held too much meaning for him. He didn't know when he might die, and he didn't want to tie Cade down with that kind of promise. He decided he would make a pendant instead. Leo smiled brightly and said that was a great idea, asking Jace to let him see it when it was done. Soon, the sound of rotors filled the sky as 2 helicopters arrived to pick them up. Leo ran joyfully to embrace his husband. Jace, affecting a cooler demeanor, walked slowly to meet Cade. He complained that they had come too early, that he hadn't had enough time to explore. Cade's face darkened when he saw a scrape on Jace's hand from the climb. Because of their previous escape together, both Cade and Asher were convinced that Jace and Leo were a bad influence on each other. Cade turned to Asher and demanded he get his wild partner under control, complaining that he was always showing up on some ridiculous motorcycle and luring Jace away for days at a time. Asher retorted that at least Leo wasn't a geek who was constantly showing Jace explicit comics, which he deemed detrimental to his moral fiber. Jace protested their airing of his dirty laundry. Leo just laughed happily, hugging Asher and telling him not to be angry. Asher's expression softened, and he led Leo onto their helicopter. Leo waved goodbye to Jace, his eyes as bright as the amber in his pocket, full of a hope that seemed to overflow. Neither of them could have known that Leo would die on the very day he finished making the ring. It was a horrific car accident. Leo was impaled by a piece of wreckage, one of his signature canine teeth knocked out. Blood pooled at Jace's feet. Leo stared at the sky, his eyes unfocused, his lips moving soundlessly. Jace leaned down, his body trembling, to hear his last words. It was just one name, whispered over and over again until his eyes lost their light completely. Jace pulled the blood-soaked ring from his friend's lifeless hand, his own soul feeling as if it had been torn from his body. The wail of sirens was a distant noise. Cade arrived, pulling him into a tight embrace and covering his eyes, telling him not to look. For a week after that, Jace was mute. He couldn't accept that his best friend was gone. He was plagued by nightmares of Leo's final moments, waking up to find his face wet with tears. Cade would hold him, his voice filled with concern, kissing the tears away and telling him he still had him. One night, Jace grabbed Cade and kissed him fiercely. Leo's death was a stark reminder of the story's unchangeable ending. He wanted to believe he could escape it, that he could be with Cade forever. But the next morning, while brushing his teeth, he spit a mouthful of black blood into the sink. His own ending was coming. He went to see Asher. The vast mansion was silent and gloomy, the entire ground floor arranged as a memorial hall. Asher knelt alone before a glass coffin, his long silver-blonde hair falling to his waist. Without turning, he told Jace he wasn't receiving visitors. A week had passed, and he still hadn't buried Leo, choosing instead to keep a vigil over his body like a man possessed. Jace said he had something of Leo's for him. At that, Asher finally reacted. Jace handed him the simple, translucent amber ring. Asher stared at it, his eyes slowly turning red. He remarked that it was the same color as Leo's eyes. He kissed the ring, and a tear traced a path down his cheek. Jace turned and left. On the way home, Cade said that for some reason, he had a persistent feeling that Jace was going to leave him too. He sighed, adding that if Jace were the one who had died, he would probably become just like Asher. In that moment, Jace decided he would not accept his fate. He would not leave Cade alone. If the system wanted him to die of sickness, he would fight it. He started a rigorous health regimen, convinced he could will himself to live. One afternoon, he was lying with his head on Cade's chest, reading a comic, when Cade asked why he had gotten so thin recently. Jace claimed it was from his new fitness routine. Cade's brow furrowed with worry, so Jace changed the subject, asking him to read with him. Cade didn't always understand Jace's hobbies, but he always made an effort, helping him with his gotcha games and collecting blind box toys. He had even commissioned a custom plush doll of himself for Jace to sleep with at night. Cade pointed to a character in the comic, remarking that it looked a bit like Jace. Jace was surprised. Cade explained that if Jace wore a school uniform, he would be a perfect match. The character was a minor one who had become the most popular in the series due to his unique boyish charm and perfect face. Cade asked if he would wear one for him. Jace laughed, rolling on top of him. He called him a pervert. Cade's breathing hitched, and he leaned in to kiss him. Jace responded eagerly. In truth, he didn't know how much longer they would have moments like this. Despite his resistance, his body was failing. First, the painkillers stopped working. Then, he couldn't keep any food down. He suffered a stress fracture while jogging. He was constantly running a fever, and his nose bled frequently. In a matter of days, his cheeks became gaunt and his ribs were clearly visible. He had tried to prepare himself, but when he woke up one morning to find sores on his skin, he finally broke. He screamed into the empty room, demanding the system show itself. He railed against it, yelling that he was a living person, not a soulless pawn in its narrative. He declared that he would live, and he would love Cade. If their love violated the rules, then the rules were garbage. The book and its twisted story of love were nothing but trash. The system remained silent, but Jace suddenly clutched his chest, overcome by a violent fit of coughing that brought up mouthfuls of blood. He thought it would pass, But it only grew worse, until his body was convulsing in a pool of his own blood. Cade burst through the door, his eyes wide with horror. The hospital diagnosed him with bone cancer, and leukemia, and other unheard-of ailments. It was as if every terminal illness had descended upon him at once. He was only 18. When he opened his eyes, he saw Cade's exhausted face. Cade told him he needed surgery. His voice strained as he tried to remain calm, though the anguish in his eyes was overwhelming. Jace knew. He smiled and asked if it was an amputation. Cade faltered, then said that as long as he was safe, losing a leg didn't matter, promising to get him the best prosthesis available. His voice broke, and he realized he was crying. He excused himself from the room. The system's voice returned. It informed him he would die on the operating table tomorrow at 6 p.m. Jace just smiled. The next morning, he told Cade he had made a gift for him, hidden in a drawer in the closet at home. He asked him to go and get it, saying he wanted to see him wear it. Cade hesitated, but eventually agreed. As soon as he was alone, Jace disappeared from the hospital. He took the time to groom himself. He was skeletal and ugly now, but he wanted the last image Cade had of him to be a decent one. He took a long series of subways and buses to the cliff face where he and Leo used to explore. Every step was agony, but his face remained a mask of determination. He climbed to the top and stood at the edge, the wind whipping at his clothes. He thought that he would not die by the system's rules. Even in death, he would choose his own way. As he expected, Cade found him quickly. Jace turned and smiled. He told him that he had wanted to see him in a school uniform. He then formally introduced himself as Jace, an 18-year-old ordinary college student from a parallel universe. Cade stared, asking what he was doing. He took a tentative step forward, his outstretched hand trembling, begging Jace to come back. But Jace simply took a deep breath and stepped backward. He told Cade that his home was very far away. He said that this world was not real, and that Cade could choose not to believe him. But that he had to remember that even after he was gone, he would continue to love him from another world. He told him he loved him and asked him to remember him. The moment he jumped, the world, built to protect its protagonist, began to warp. The cliff face fractured, and massive vines erupted from the rock, pulling Cade back from the edge. He watched Jace fall, tears streaming down his face, the blue gemstone pendant swinging wildly from his neck. He fought against the vines, his muscles straining, but he couldn't reach him. A heartbroken scream tore through the sky. He was being pulled further and further away. Jace smiled, relaxed, and closed his eyes. Finally, the damn-side character would be smashed to pieces. He woke to a splitting headache and the sight of his own familiar ceiling. He was disoriented. His mother was crying, saying her baby boy was finally awake. He tried to speak, but his throat was raw and his body ached. His mother helped him drink some water, explaining that his father was flying back from the States and that he and Leo had been in an accident while out on a trip. She paused, noticing his own tears. She asked why he was crying, her voice full of pain. Through his sobs, he managed to say that he had lost someone. His mother asked who it was, and he could only reply that it was someone he had loved very much. She looked around, confused, then picked up a character pillow from the floor. She asked nervously if this was what he meant, if it was his favorite anime character. She pleaded with him not to scare her. She told him that Leo had been the same way when he woke up, completely lost, even trying to jump from a window, saying he needed to go back somewhere. Jace and Leo were in the same hospital. Once he could walk, Jace went to visit him. Leo, his head still bandaged, was sitting by the window, lost in thought. Jace sat on the edge of his bed and remarked that if he had known he could come back after dying, he wouldn't have been so sad. Leo turned, surprised. He asked if Jace had cried after he died. Jace looked down at his phone and ignored him. Leo leaned in, pestering him, asking if he cried or not. Jace finally cracked a smile and told him to get lost. Leo laughed with him, but their smiles soon faded. After they recovered, they searched every bookstore and website they could think of, but they never found the novel. It was as if it had never existed, as if it had all been a shared hallucination. The greatest punishment wasn't death. It was remembering and knowing you could never see them again. The autumn leaves were falling. Jace and Leo were waiting for the subway when a group of 3 girls approached them, asking for their numbers. Jace politely declined, saying he had a partner. Leo, engrossed in his phone, added that his wife was very strict. The girls apologized and hurried away. Then, a familiar chime sounded. The system was back. It told them not to be alarmed, that it was only there to deliver a message. The world of the novel had collapsed. They both froze. The system explained that their actions had caused the protagonists to question the nature of their reality, which had led to its inevitable disintegration. The lingering attachments of Asher and Cade were so strong that, not long ago, their souls had been transferred to the real world. They had willingly given up everything to be with them, and they had arrived without any of their memories. From now on, they were free from the script. Their own story was just beginning. It concluded by wishing them a long and happy life with their true loves. Jace and Leo walked down the street, buzzing with excitement. According to the system, the time difference between the worlds was massive. They wondered how old their partners would be now. Leo mimed a basketball shot, declaring that this time he was going to be the one on top. Jace indulged in his own fantasies. Their families were well off, not on the same scale as in the book, but more than capable of supporting a boyfriend. This time, no one could call them kept men. As they were reveling in their future prospects, they were pushed aside by a throng of screaming fans. Jace stumbled, and his eyes fell on a massive outdoor screen on a nearby skyscraper. It was broadcasting an interview with a business magnate. The interviewer was stating that the Pay Corporation's profits had reached $10 billion the previous year and was asking about future goals. At the same time, a long limousine pulled up, and a celebrity with distinctive silver blonde hair stepped out, greeted by a deafening roar from his fans. Jace and Leo stared, dumbfounded. It seemed they were destined to be kept men for 2 lifetimes.